You're watching the Run For It YouTube channel. I'm Finlay, and this episode is a full review of the brand new Adidas Adizero Boston 13 running shoes. We'll talk through the tech updates, how they feel to run in, how they fit, and what they're best suited to. Hope you enjoy. Starting with the midsole then, there is 13.8% more LIGHTSTRIKE Pro foam in the midsole, which is mostly added to the forefoot section of the midsole. So if we look back to the previous Boston, you can see how the LIGHTSTRIKE Pro foam is just running along the top of the midsole there. However, in the latest version, it's extending right down into the bottom of the forefoot. So there's more of that foam in that position. Now, what you won't read on the tech descriptions and on the web content is the fact that this LIGHTSTRIKE Pro is the new formula. So this is what's in the Adios Pro 4 running shoes. So for anyone who ran in the Adios Pro 3 running shoes and then moved to the Adios Pro 4, you will know how much softer and bouncier this new compound is. So that means that the latest Adizero Boston 13 delivers more cushioning and more energy return. And in case you're wondering, the bottom layer of the midsole, well, that foam is still Adidas's LIGHTSTRIKE foam. So while that doesn't offer as much energy return as LIGHTSTRIKE Pro, it does offer slightly better underfoot stability. It's a slightly inherently more stable material. So if you look on the medial side of the shoe, you can see how there's actually some of that positioned on the medial side of the forefoot section. So when you consider where that's positioned in the shoe, you've got quite a significant proportion in the heel area and a little bit in the medial section of the forefoot. That just helps make the midsole a little bit more stable underfoot, particularly if you're heel striking and then when you're running at a range of paces in your training miles. It should also offer a little more durability than the LIGHTSTRIKE Pro foam. So again, making the Boston a more suitable option for those weekly training runs. The midsole still features glass fibre infused energy rods. So you can see a little bit of that structure here, and you can see it on the bottom of the midsole. Now, glass fibre is a little bit more flexible than carbon. So this should deliver a slightly more forgiving, more natural feel than the carbon fibre infused energy rods that are in the Adios Pro 4. So again, making the Boston a more suitable option for training miles. But having said that, those energy rods still improve propulsion and they also help limit energy loss from the midsole. Now, importantly, one of the big benefits of these energy rods is that they can move independently of one another. And the benefit of this is that they might feel a little bit more natural under your feet in comparison to a carbon fibre plate or any plated structure. It's pretty impossible to put on a plated running shoe and not be quite aware of that plated structure under your feet. And sometimes that's a great thing, but sometimes we don't necessarily want that. And while when you're running in the Boston, as we'll come on to when we talk about the performance when you're actually running in them, you will be aware that there's something there. A lot of people might put on the Boston and actually not really necessarily notice that that structure is in the midsole. So again, that helps make the Boston just that more comfortable option for those weekly sessions. Now, this next point isn't an update, but it will be pretty relevant for some of you watching. And this is all about the rocker point, because in the Adios Pro 4, one of the major updates was that the rocker point shifted to 60% of the midsole. And that creates, or it does create, a very aggressive rocker point in the shoe, which really propels you forward, transitions you through the gait cycle very quickly, very efficiently. Now, that feels great when you're trying to run fast and when you're not running in it that frequently, but it might not necessarily be the best thing all the time. And just to confirm, the Boston hasn't followed that line of development. There isn't a significant change in the rocker point. It still has a pretty traditional shape in the curve there. So yes, this is still tuned to move you forward quickly and increase that propulsive effect, but it's not going to create that ultra rapid transition from heel to toe off or landing to toe off like the Adios Pro 4 will. And that again just might be important for some of you watching, because there might be some runners who again do get on very well with that aggressive rocker point for some of their training and racing, but don't necessarily want to have that sensation all of the time. Now, another relatively significant update is the change in outsole. So if we compare the Boston 12 to the Boston 13, you can see how the compound has been shifted from continental rubber the whole way down the outsole to a combination of Adidas's light traction outsole rubber and then a section of continental rubber in the toe box. Now, the reason that Adidas have made this change is because they can make the light traction rubber a little bit thinner while still maintaining the same durability that continental rubber offers. Now, there was definitely, just going back to the Adios Pro 4, there was definitely some concern when the Adios Pro 4 introduced light traction because Adios Pro 3 wearers will know just how durable that continental rubber outsole was on that super shoe. But from a lot of testing personally, the Adios Pro 4 are delivering very good levels of durability, so there's no real concerns over the performance that this light traction rubber is going to offer. And again, just because the Boston is for those training miles, there's quite a high proportion of that rubber on the outsole, so that should help ensure you're getting maximum use out of them. There is still, as mentioned, that section of continental rubber in the toe box, and that's to just give you that final bit of grip when you might really need it at the end of the toe-off phase. When it comes to the upper of the Boston, it features the same engineered mesh, but an updated pattern delivers a little bit more breathability and a softer touch. The big updates come at the heel counter and the tongue. A lot of runners' gripe with the previous version was that it just lacked the lockdown and security that they wanted at the back of the shoe. And many runners had to use that lock lacing system where you used that butterfly loop at the back to keep that ankle collar secure. So there's an increase in padding. You can maybe see that on the camera on the inside of the heel counter, which just helps bring that heel counter in around your ankle. And there's also a little bit more padding on the top of the tongue. So you just get a bit more security around that area of the shoe. I'd still say it could be better. Interestingly, the Adios Pro 4 feels like a lighter, more flexible heel counter, but that light lock upper in the Adios Pro 4 is just absolutely incredible. It provides such a secure fit around your feet, and I do think the Boston in future versions might benefit from adopting that light lock structure. One of the major benefits of this upper design is that it is pretty accommodating. So if you have a slightly broader foot shape, then you'll find there should be quite a lot of space for your feet to splay. The downside of that is that if you have a narrower foot shape, the chances are the Boston might be a touch too broad for you and you may have to look at a slightly different option. Important information when it comes to sizing, I think, is we would highly recommend going up half a shoe size in comparison to your normal running shoe size. So not any bigger than what you normally are in an Adi running shoe, but in comparison to most brands, you probably will find that going up that half a size just gives you the right length at the end of your toes, because the last thing that you want when you're trying to run fast, particularly if you're running a longer distance, is for your toes to be hitting off the end of the shoe. Not only can that cause bruising, cause discomfort, it can actually limit the power output that you can generate through your foot. So it is really important that you get that space right at the end of the shoe. In this next section, we'll now cover how the Boston feels to run in. Now, to get a really good measure of how they perform, tested them out at a range of paces and intensities. So in addition to a fair few easy miles and slow-paced runs, did 3 specific sessions in the Boston to really get a gauge of how this midsole performs. So those runs included a 6-kilometer threshold builder run. So that was 2 kilometers, 2 kilometers, 2 kilometers. So every 2 kilometers, drop the pace by about 10 seconds per kilometer pace. So finishing the last 2K at around 3:30 minutes per kilometer speed. Then did a slightly longer run with light tempo, steady effort in the middle, so 35 minutes at around 4 minutes per kilometer pace, and then did a VO2 session in the Boston. So did 8 by 300 meters running at a pretty hard intensity, so dropping down below that 3 minutes per kilometer pace. So that means tested them out from everything from slow easy miles at around 5 minutes per kilometer pace all the way down to under 3 minutes per kilometre pace. So it probably makes sense to talk through how the midsole feels running from slow to fast. So starting with those easy pace miles or slower runs, the cushioning feels perfectly comfortable. It is protective and you do get a good sense of cushioning. But I think for the avoidance of doubt, this isn't going to deliver or feel ultra plush under your feet. It is nothing like a really soft, max cushioned running shoe. So just to manage expectations there, if you are going to use it for those easier pace runs. But what's probably very relevant is that if you are doing a longer warm up or a longer cool down from a key workout, whether that's a tempo session or some intervals, the midsole cushioning does feel very protective and very cushioned when you're returning or getting to the start of your session. Also, importantly, it feels very stable underfoot. The last thing you want when you're running at an easier pace is for your foot to be wobbling around everywhere, which can be the sensation that you get in some of the super shoes, and that is not so much the case with this. It delivers a very, very planted feel at those easier intensities. And I think if you were traveling, you're going away for a few days, or you're going on holiday and you did want one shoe that you could do everything in, you could definitely use this for those easier 30-40 minute runs in addition to those faster pace workouts. Now, interestingly, you feel this all the way through at every speed, but maybe most pronounced at the slower speeds, is there's a much more seamless transition in the midsole with the new construction with the compound. So in the previous Boston, it was quite noticeable as you're transitioning through the shoe, the difference in the foams, the softness and in the firmness. Whether is in this midsole, it feels much more natural, and you can almost not even detect that there is two foams in the midsoles at times. It just feels very smooth underfoot, which definitely increases the comfort. And naturally, as you start to pick up the speed, that's when you start to feel the benefit of this midsole design at those steadier efforts. So pushing down to that 4 minute per kilometre speed, it just feels a lot more agile, a lot more dynamic, and you're starting to feel that energy return, that propulsion from the midsole. And I think what might appeal to a lot of runners is while this still offers a lot of cushioning, the stack height isn't that high. It's a 36mm high heel, so you're not getting that really and potentially disconnected feel that you can get in some super shoes or some max cushion trainers now. So obviously the opposite from that is you just feel a little bit more connected to the midsole. It makes it a little bit easier to just find a more natural rhythm and feel a little bit more in tune with what's going on under your feet. And just carrying on from that last point, when you start to move to those threshold intensities, the way the midsole feels makes it very easy to just adjust your speed, whether that's dropping down the pace by 5 to 10 seconds per kilometre or maybe slowing down slightly. It's really easy to find your groove with the midsole with that slightly more connected feel. What's important to note is if you are looking for absolute maximum propulsion for those hard, high intensity threshold sessions, particularly those race day workouts, you're not going to get that from the Boston. It just isn't going to offer you quite as much speed as some of the other models out there. However, it still does deliver great underfoot propulsion, and it is perfect for those weekly threshold sessions or interval workouts that are around that second lactate turn point or just above that first lactate turn point. And just adding a bit more to that last point as well, I interestingly noticed my calf muscles were maybe a little bit more fatigued than normal after that threshold session in the Boston, but this might surprise you. I was actually really pleased about that because the midsole felt really propulsive, didn't have any issues hitting the pace, was definitely getting some assistance from the shoe. But what that potentially shows with that little bit of fatigue in the calf muscles was that I was maybe working a little bit harder with what I had. And the danger of using really propulsive super shoes all the time is that you start get reliant on them and start to get a bit lazy with your form. So the real benefit of using a model such as a Boston for those workouts is that you are going to get that help to be able to enable you to hit those intensities that you're trying to aim for. You will get a bit of a recovery benefit because when I say my calves were fatigued. They weren't tight or sore. I could just go straight back into my training the next day, or could have run again later that day. But I clearly was just using a little bit more of what I had. So I think if you want to continue to develop every element of your running and your biomechanics, using this sort of structure for those sessions could have huge benefits for your running. And what actually caught me out was just how good the cushioning felt for those higher intensity sessions. So that VO2 workout, the 8x300 meters, I was expecting the midsole to lack that propulsion and energy return that I potentially needed for that session, and that what I've become accustomed to with using predominantly an all-out super shoe for that type of session. But actually, the responsiveness of the midsole, the agile feel that it delivers, it made it really easy to pick up the speed and then keep your legs turning over, which is obviously one of the most important factors when you're trying to hit those higher intensity paces. And if anything, sometimes in the full race day super shoes, it can feel a little bit cumbersome when you start to try and run at a faster speed and really get your pace up. It was potentially a little bit easier to do that in the Boston. So you can definitely use this model for those harder workouts, those VO2 sessions. It'd be a great option if you were doing something like 30 seconds on hard, 30 seconds off, and you're really wanting to change your gears and switch your speed up on quite a high degree. Or potentially if you're doing a hill session as well, if you're doing something like 30 seconds or 45 seconds up a steep incline, the midsole should feel really good for that. Because interestingly, again, just going back to that point on stability, ideally if you're doing an all-out hard session where you're trying to hit very high speeds, you're probably not wanting to include a lot of corners or changes in direction in that type of session. But you might have to in Edinburgh, in Scotland. If you're training around the meadows, you might have to move around quite tight corners on some of those loops. This will offer much better stability than obviously some of the super shoes out there with that higher stat midsole. So again, just helps improve your confidence. And just one additional point on injuries and loading. There are quite a lot of runners out there now reporting problems higher up their kinetic chain, so around their hamstring area into the glute, really kind of reporting hamstring tendinopathies. And that is potentially linked to the increased use of very aggressive super shoes, which transfer that load further up the kinetic chain. And obviously when you're running faster and you're running at really hard intensities, that's when those loads and those forces are increased. So going back to the point about using a little bit more of what you have in the Boston when you're doing those higher, harder intensity sessions, you may find that this just mitigates some of the risk of getting those overuse injuries higher up in the kinetic chain. So overall, it's fair to say that the Boston 13 offer incredible versatility. You can use these for a lot of steady miles and the majority of your speed sessions. Additionally, because the midsole is so stable, it should work for quite a wide range of runners. And if you're the type of runner who is looking for that extra performance on race day, whether that's in a 10K, half marathon or marathon, but you have some concerns over whether or not an all-out race day super shoe is going to give you enough support and comfort in the later stages of that run, that's where it's likely the Boston could be a much better option for you. Priced at £140, the Boston also offers immense value. It's not unfair to say that there are quite a few shoes which are priced at a higher price point than the Boston, which don't necessarily offer quite as much performance and certainly not as much durability as what these do. So again, it is amazing what Adidas deliver with this shoe. And just to wrap up the differences between the Boston and the Adios Pro 4, yes, providing the Adios Pro 4 are the right shoes for your feet, they're going to feel softer, bouncier and more propulsive than the Boston. However, touching again on points raised in this episode, if you use the Adios Pro 4 all of the time, so you're using it on a weekly basis for your speed-based training sessions, you're going to get used to that performance that it offers. And it may be the case that when it comes to race day, you might not actually then feel such a benefit from that shoe. There's the chances that you could get a little bit lazy and reliant on that help as well if you use it too much. And don't underestimate the power of perception of effort. If you think that something is helping you and you're getting a bigger advantage from it, then that can count for a lot on race day. So by using the Boston for your training sessions, yes, it might not feel as fast as the Adios Pro 4, but you are still going to get that benefit. And importantly, you're just going to develop a little bit more as an overall athlete. On to the durability as well. The Boston is just going to last a lot longer than the Adios Pro 4. So the super shoes, these race day models, they are expensive. They are an investment. But if you only use them for a few races, actually the return is very good and they will last you a long time. And then it means that you can use something like this, the Boston, for a lot more of those training miles. So our recommendation is you should be able to transition between a Boston and an Adios Pro 4 with relative ease. So opt for this for your training miles and those speed sessions in the week, but then use the Adios Pro 4 and save that for race day. So to conclude, the Boston just gets better and better. The Boston 12 was a massive upgrade on the 11, and while it might not seem like the 13 has as much of a significant update in comparison to the 12 as the 12 was to the 11, it features a ton of small refinements which ultimately make this one of the best running shoes that you can buy. It is really hard to think of reasons as to why you wouldn't want this in your shoe rotation. It is simply one of the best shoes out there. And that brings me to the end of this Boston review. Thank you very much for watching. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. If you have any questions at all on some of the points we've raised in the episode or some of the points we've not talked about that you think are relevant, please comment on the episode and we will get back to you as soon as we can. See you soon.